Okay, so now we are going to look at the strengths and weaknesses of Henson's claim against Richmond Street Productions. Um, I keep referring to them as Marvel because they are basically a Marvel company, so that's why I do that. Um, Legally, the company being sued is Richmond Street Productions. So we're going to look at Richmond Street Productions, what it is, and its link to Marvel, and then go and do a similar take a similar direction as to what I did in the Sony video, where I just go through the claims, the defenses, and strengths, weaknesses. Okay, so I likened this yesterday in the Sony video. I described Richmond Street Productions and the link to Marvel as when you think of Wayfarer Studios were the production company. They financed a film. However, they set up its own personal individual LLC, which, um, you know, production companies do that all the time. And the one for Deadpool and Wolverine was Richmond Street Productions, and I'm hypothesizing that the reason it was called that was because of the location of filming being in Richmond. So Richmond is an area just outside London. It's in Surrey, is the county that it is. And it's allegedly where, if Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds and the story about them moving to the UK is true, that is the area they are looking to move to. So, in theory, it's quite a posh area, but a very nice area. I used to work in that area. But yeah, so that's where that comes from. Okay, so a single sentence in the amended complaint, Henson's amended complaint, establishes the entire relationship between Richmond Street Productions and Marvel Studios and unlocks a chain of direct, vicarious, and secondary liability that runs from RSP through to Disney. And the quote is, Richmond Street Productions is a California limited liability company created by Marvel Studios with its principal place of business at 500 South Buena Vista Street, Burbank, California. So Henson makes this allegation in connection himself in the amended complaint. RSP is a Marvel-created production entity. So what the complaint alleges that RSP was created by Marvel Studios. It is a California LLC, and it is headquartered at Marvel's Buena Vista Street campus in Burbank. RSP is not an independent company, it is a special purpose production vehicle formed by Marvel. So why studios create production LLCs? This structure is extremely common in film production. Studios routinely create LLCs for each film or major production unit to achieve the following objectives: isolate liability per project, manage and centralize contracts, handle payroll and crew agreements, centralize rights clearance, streamline insurance coverage, and separate accounting for each production. Now, RSP is almost certainly the production entity for Deadpool and Wolverine, or for the opening sequence specifically. Because we do know that the opening sequence was done in, I want to say, in the January or February of 2024. So it was done after all the principal photography was already shot. It was very late on that was added. RSP acts as Marvel's production arm for the film. Now, the complaint alleges that SME gave RSP a non-exclusive license to reproduce the chorus of the work in the main title opening sequence of Deadpool and Wolverine. RSP's operational role is extensive and clearly documented. So, licensing. RSP handled the choreography licensing directly from Sony Music Entertainment. Production. RSP filmed and directed the opening sequence, including choreography, direction, and motion capture. Hiring. RSP engaged Nick Pauly to perform the choreography on behalf of the production. And I will weigh in a bit more on that on the Ryan Reynolds, Sean Levy, Nick Pauly video. Delivery. RSP delivered the completed sequence to Marvel and Disney for global distribution. So RSP equals Marvel's operational production unit for the infringing sequence. Marvel Studios is the parent. RSP is a subsidiary production vehicle. Okay, so Disney distributed the film. RSP produced the infringing material. Now, at the moment, Disney is not a defendant. They could well go on to be at some point down the road, but right now they are not. And nor is Marvel themselves. I have to say that. At the moment, it is just Richmond Street Productions. So, there's a little sort of chain here. Marvel Studios, parent studio, supervised and controlled RSP. RSP, production entity that created and filmed the infringing sequence. And then Walt Disney Studios Motion Pictures, distributor, released the film globally. Legal consequences of the Marvel RSP relationship. So Marvel is vicariously liable. Marvel created the RSP, supervised its conduct, benefited from its work, and retained the right and ability to control RSP's actions. And this would satisfy vicarious liability under Fonavisa and Grokster. So I am sort of just given the hypothetical, could, in theory, Marvel be added? Yes. Yes, they could. RSP is directly liable. RSP reproduced the choreography, filmed it, and integrated it into the opening sequence, hired Pauly, and used the choreography in promotional activities. This satisfies direct infringement under Section 106. And then, could Disney be added? Yes. Disney is secondarily liable. Disney distributed the film containing the infringing choreography globally across theatrical, streaming, and home entertainment channels, creating secondary infringement exposure. The practical reality is RSP is Marvel. So the same as Wayfarer Studios got sued, and so did, some of the co-founders, Justin Baldoni and Steve Sarowitz, but also so did It Ends With Us movie. So in theory, yes, all of them could be sued here as well. In industry practice, RSP is a Marvel shell company. It has no independent commercial identity outside of Marvel's production structure. RSP was created to produce Deadpool and Wolverine, and its liability is, in practical terms, Marvel's liability. And this is precisely where the complaint names RSP rather than Marvel directly. RSP is the entity that executed the infringing acts. Marvel is automatically pulled in through vicarious liability and Disney through distribution. The liability chain. So RSP is wholly controlled by Marvel. RSP executed the infringing sequence. RSP hired the performer. RSP relied on Sony's contested license. Marvel supervised and benefited, and Disney distributed globally. The production LLC at the center of the claim. So this is now RSP specifically. The link between Richmond Street Productions and Marvel is unambiguous. RSP is a production LLC created by Marvel Studios to produce Deadpool and Wolverine. So RSP's role, headquartered at Marvel's campus, wholly controlled by Marvel, executed the infringing choreography sequence, hired the performance, relied on Sony's contested license, delivered the sequence to Disney. Marvel's role, they created RSP, supervised RSP's production activities, benefited from RSP's work, vicariously liable for RSP's infringement. And then Disney's role, distributed the film globally, monetized the infringing content, and secondarily liable as distributor. So now let's look at the claims. That sounds a bit repetitive, but I needed to kind of, lay the foundation for what I think is going to come. Even if it doesn't come, that is a Darren Henson. That's a decision he will take with his attorneys. But the possibilities are open to him, as are other possibilities, which I will do in separate videos. But we are talking specifically now about Richmond Street Productions. They are currently a defendant at the moment. Marvel and Disney are not. So RSP is one of the highest exposure defendants, second only to Sony and Epic Games. I think it's on the same level as Epic Games, and I think they're both second to Sony. The claim against RSP is substantially stronger than the claims against Bass or Pauly, and stronger than the claims against most individual defendants, so that could include any of the potential does. The reasons for this elevated exposure are structural, factual, and legal. RSP sits at the operational centre of the infringing acts. It is not a peripheral or passive participant. It is the entity that produced, filmed, and delivered the infringing choreography sequence. So there's a little exposure rank in there. Sony and Epic. See, I'm not sure. At the time I wrote this, I did say Sony and Epic Games are, they're the same level. And they still could be, because Fortnite was huge. And it was like an offshoot. It wasn't part of the film. Yeah, I'm going to stick with it, actually. Right, we'll just say that in top place, Sony and Epic Games are the two biggest liabilities, biggest pockets. Then we've got 2 Richmond Street Productions. Then 3 Marvel and Disney, potentially, if they get brought in. And lower is Bass, Pauly, and any other individual defendants. So the core allegation against RSP: SME gave RSP a non-exclusive license to reproduce the chorus of the work in the main title opening sequence of Deadpool and Wolverine, to exhibit and distribute the same within the film, and to use the same as advertising and promotional material for the film. The single allegation creates 4 independent infringement theories, each capable of standing alone. Firstly, reproduction. RSP reproduced the choreography in the opening sequence of the film. That's undeniable. Secondly, distribution. RSP distributed the film containing the choreography globally through Disney. 3, public performance. RSP used the choreography in the marketing and promotional appearances via Pauly, including at the Oscars. 4, commercial profit. RSP benefited financially from inclusion of the choreography in a major theatrical release. This is direct infringement, not merely vicarious, making RSP's exposure among the highest of any defendant. Again, except for potentially Sony. So why is the claim extremely strong? Firstly, there's high-value commercial exploitation. The use was deliberate, choreographed, filmed, edited, integrated into the opening sequence, distributed globally, and used in marketing. This was not incidental, it is central. 2, Sony's license may be invalid. If Sony did not own the choreography, and they are unable to find that work for hire agreement, its license to RSP was invalid. RSP's license does not eliminate liability, it becomes a direct infringer, jointly and severally liable with Sony. 3, global monetization creates massive damages. The film was released worldwide, streamed, marketed and promoted, box office, streaming, merchandise and cross-promotion all contribute to massive actual damages exposure. 4, use is documented, intentional and not de minimis. The choreography is iconic, recognizable, and used intentionally for comedic effect in the opening sequence. Courts reject de minimis arguments for recognizable choreography. And then finally, use is not transformative. The choreography is used as choreography, not as parody, commentary, or criticism. So the Ninth Circuit does not accept transformative arguments in this context. Overall strength assessment. So there are 4 independent infringement theories: reproduction, distribution, public performance, and commercial profit, each a standalone claim. 6 strength factors. There is commercial use, global distribution, documented evidence, no de minimis defense, no transformative use, invalid license chain. And there are 0 complete defenses available. There is no defense which fully eliminates RSP's liability. Even the strongest defenses only mitigate damages. And again, the only complete defense they would have, which would apply to all of the defendants, is if Sony come up with a work for hire agreement, which was signed with Darren Henson. He says he never signed one. Sony can't seem to find one. They haven't found one in 2 years. The chances of them finding it anytime soon are minimal. So my overall assessment of them as defendants was a very strong case against them. RSP is one of the top 3 defendants with the greatest exposure in this litigation. Its position at the operational centre of the infringing acts makes it uniquely vulnerable. Does Richmond Street Productions have any viable defences? Well, like I did with Sony, let's have a look. So they have several defences available, generally, but none of them operate as a complete bar to liability. At best, they mitigate damages or shift blame to Sony. Understanding these defences and their limitations is essential, though, to understanding RSP's overall risk profile. So I ranked them from strongest to weakest, like I did with Sony. First one is reliance on Sony's license, which is the strongest. 2, work for hire theory. 3, innocent infringement, but that would only limit damages. 4, transformative use. 5, de minimis. Fair use, number 6. And then 7, statute of limitations. So the strongest defense for RSP would be a reliance on Sony's license. Their core argument would be Sony represented that it owned the choreography and licensed it to them. They reasonably relied on those representations, had no reason to suspect Sony lacked the rights, and acted throughout in good faith and in accordance with standard industry practice. The limit with this, though, is good faith reliance does not eliminate liability. RSP can reduce its damages exposure and strengthen its indemnity position against Sony, but it cannot escape a finding of direct infringement on this basis alone. This defense is most valuable as a damages mitigation and as a mechanism to force Sony to bear the greater share of any judgment. And I think there's, a reasonable chance of some success with this defense. So what does it achieve? It reduces statutory damages exposure, shifts primary blame and financial burden to Sony, supports indemnity and contribution claims against Sony, and undermines any finding of willful infringement. The next one, work for hire theory. So if Sony signed a work for hire agreement with the original choreographer, then Sony owns the choreography outright. Its license to RSP was valid, and RSP is fully shielded from liability, as would every other defendant be. The claim against RSP would effectively collapse. Now, if Sony has the contract, they own the choreography, the license is valid. RSP then would bear no liability. The entire claim pivots to whether Henson's work was sufficiently original and distinct. But if Sony cannot produce it, the complaint alleges Sony cannot locate a signed writing. So without a signed work for hire agreement, Sony cannot establish ownership. And then RSP cannot rely on a license that Sony lacked authority to grant. This defense is only helpful, it's only strong if Sony produces a signed contract. In its absence, the argument provides RSP with no protection whatsoever. Next defense is innocent infringement. So RSP's argument, RSP genuinely believed Sony owned the choreography. Not unreasonably though, because they owned the rights to the song and the music video. They are, they hold copyright registration for those items. So I can see that the argument is a reasonable one for their attorneys to make. RSP relied on established industry custom and practice. RSP acted in good faith throughout production. RSP had no notice of Henson's claim until 2024. Again, this is where I think that Nick Pawley crediting and acknowledging the work as Darren Henson's would have made this difficult. He was as the choreography. He is hired by RSP, and as a choreographer, he is aware that the credit belonged to Darren Henson, and this was Darren Henson's work. I would argue that an industry, an entity that works entirely around the entertainment industry could have and should have known that that Sony, that there could have been more due diligence done to ensure that Sony owned the work. RSP had no notice of Henson's claim until 2024. The film came out in 2024, so you wouldn't expect it to be any sooner anyway. RSP followed standard clearance procedures. That would be an argument for them to make and prove. The burden would be on them. So, under US Code 17, Section 504C2, a court may reduce statutory damages to as low as $200 per work for innocent infringement compared to the standard range of $750 to $30,000 or the willful range of up to $150,000. This defense does not eliminate liability. It is a damages mitigation tool only and is most effective when combined with the Sony reliance argument. So that could potentially spare them, get them off the hook for paying, $150,000 per work. It could bring down the damages to, as low as $200 per work, or it could put them in the range of $750 to $30,000, in that kind of range there. It does not remove liability though from them. It only mitigates the damages. The next two defenses: transformative use and de minimis. So just transformative use, I put that down as weak. RSP may argue the choreography was used in a comedic, interrupted and stylized context within a larger audiovisual work. However, the choreography is used as choreography, recognizably and deliberately. Again, if someone had shut off the music, they would recognize the dance. Because the most pertinent parts, the most recognizable parts of the dance was kept in for, what we saw in the opening credits. And just for me, having the music there alongside just confirms that it is that dance. So the choreography is used as choreography recognizably and deliberately, not as commentary, parody, or criticism. The Ninth Circuit has consistently rejected transformative use arguments where the original work is used in its original form for commercial purposes, which it absolutely was. And not just for the film. There are a bunch of stuff that Nick Pawley did for various marketing and promotional stuff. And he, like Lance Bass, also did a paid-for event in Brazil where he taught the routine. This defense is unlikely to succeed. And I 100% agree with that, because it's the dance is exactly as it is. The funny parts were actually where it went to the fight scene with Deadpool, and he was literally using a skeleton to beat up a bunch of guys. That was the funny scene. The dance itself, though, was not really used I didn't think it was comedic. It was, in its entirety, the entire sequence was clever. But if I took the fight scene out, I wouldn't have found the dance scene funny. I don't know. Let me know what you think, though. De minimis use, very weak. So RSP may contend that choreography only appears briefly, as part of a montage, and in an interrupted format. But courts reject de minimis arguments where the work is iconic, recognizable, and used intentionally for comedic or narrative effect. The choreography here is all three. Its deliberate inclusion in marketing materials further undermines any claim that the use was incidental or trivial. And not only that, the guy who allegedly pitched the idea even says, wouldn't it be funny if they were doing the NSYNC Bye 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 dance? So the dance was deliberate. Next two defences: fair use and the statute of limitations. So fair use is unavailable on these facts. The use is commercial, it is non-transformative, it substitutes for Henson's licensing market, and the exploitation is global and thoroughly monetized. All four fair use factors weigh against RSP under a standard Campbell analysis. Statute of limitations. The film was released in 2024. I don't know why I put to 2025, but it's just 2024. Henson alleges he discovered the infringement in 2024. Now, under the discovery rule applicable in the Ninth Circuit, the 3-year limitations period has not expired. So therefore, they can't argue a defense of statute of limitations. This defense has no traction on the current timeline and should not be expected to succeed. Neither fair use nor the statute of limitations offers RSP any meaningful protection. Pursuing either defense aggressively risks undermining RSP's credibility with the court on the stronger arguments. Risk assessment. So, liability likelihood is very high. RSP is the operational entity that produced, filmed, and delivered the infringing sequence. Direct infringement is substantially established in the pleadings. Damages exposure high to catastrophic. Global theatrical release, streaming distribution, and marketing use all contribute to a damages figure that could be enormous under either actual or statutory damages. And I will just say, although Sony are alleged to have licensed the dance and music to Epic Games for use in Fortnite, the Marvel, the Deadpool and Wolverine likenesses would have likely been licensed by Marvel or Disney or any one of these entities that are all interconnected here. So there would have been some kind of collaborative process going on there. I mean, without discovery, I don't exactly know what happened, and I'm pretty sure Darren Henson, that's what he alluded to, that there's stuff that he will bring in when he amends his complaint again. But right now, he can't say much because there's still some discovery going on. But that is why I expect Marvel and or Disney to join in this complaint and be added as defendants. Because there's no way that Sony would have licensed the song, the dance, but then, Epic Games were able to just use the likenesses of Deadpool and the trademarks and everything that go with it. There's a license that has gone to Epic Games from likely Marvel or Disney, or it may even have been this Richmond Street Productions. Best defenses. Reliance on Sony's license, work for hire only if Sony produces a signed contract. Innocent infringement for damages mitigation only, though. Weak or dead defenses, transformative use, de minimis, fair use, statute of limitations. None of these provide meaningful protection given the facts as alleged. So I'll put a little matrix together as well, just to kind of reconfirm that, like what I think are the strongest defenses and what I think are, just not even worth talking about. But I'm here talking about them anyway. I won't go through them all again. You can pause the screen if you want and have a look. But it basically just puts in a easy to read kind of like break visual of what I've been talking about already. Okay, so finally, Richmond Street Productions, a very strong claim, in my opinion. They face a very strong claim with high to catastrophic damages exposure. Its position as the operational production entity at the centre of the infringing acts leaves it with few meaningful defences. It reproduced the choreography in a major motion picture deliberately and commercially, distributed the film globally, monetizing the infringing content at scale, used the choreography in marketing and promotional activities, relied on Sony's license, which may be legally invalid. RSP's only meaningful escape hatch is Sony producing a signed work-for-hire agreement. If Sony cannot produce one, RSP faces high liability and damages exposure that is, on current facts, very difficult to contain. So there we are. That's Richmond Street Productions. I also refer to them as Marvel because Marvel is parent company. I think who am I going? Where am I going to go with this next? I might do. I think I'm going to do Epic Games actually next. So that'll be my next video. Then I'll do Lance Bass as an interesting twist I wanted to share in that one, where I think another member of NSYNC could be brought in. But I will explain all of that in the video. Okay, guys, let me know what you think in the comments. Any questions as well? I'm happy to answer.